Thank you, Amber, for having me today. My name is Brian Sims. I am Director of Quality and Health Improvement at the Maryland Hospital Association, working to address quality in our healthcare systems across the state of Maryland, also addressing health equity and health disparities. But currently, I'm also a candidate for City Council in Baltimore City's 7th District, that is primarily Central West to West Baltimore. I've been in this line of work in healthcare for about 13 years now, and Amber and I picked the craziest but possibly best year in the history to run for elected office, and so I'm glad to be here with you tonight, Amber, to discuss the future of families. And I know that you really talk a lot about how we prepare our families and our communities and our nation really for the future. And so I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and I'm looking forward to getting into the conversation.
Great. Well, thank you, first of all, for moderating this discussion. I really appreciate that. And thank you to all the folks who are attending today. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule, because you could be doing a million other things, but you took time to listen to this girl you never heard of before talk about why she's running for office. But before we get into that, my name is Amber Ivey, and I was born in Bethesda, Maryland. I come from a military family. Both of my parents met while in the armed forces. My dad was Army, my mom was in the Navy. They met, got married, and had me. So we spent a lot of my early childhood years traveling around the country, from as far west as Arizona to as far east across the ocean to Germany. And we retired from the military. We say families retire from the military because it is something that families experience together in Southern Virginia. And that's where I wrapped up high school and graduated from undergrad. I moved up to Baltimore in 2012 to go to University of Maryland, College Park, to get my master's degree. Before moving up here, I was a logistics manager, and my background is really in improving performance and operations. So when I was doing that, I felt that I didn't want to do it any longer for a private sector company. I wanted to take my ability to problem solve and use data to identify issues for a company in order to make them a profit, and use it to actually improve the government. So that's why I moved up to Baltimore. But my grandfather's sister moved up here in the 50s. My aunt on my dad's side moved up here about 20 some years ago now. So I've always been visiting and coming up to this area. But yes, that's basically me and a little bit about me. And we'll get into the other parts as the questions come through.
Sure, thank you. So we're gonna jump right in here.
Sounds good.
Amber, this is your first time running for elected office, am I correct?
Yes, it is.
And it is mine as well. And you are running as an independent. Do you want to say more about how you decided to come to that decision? And also, as you're describing that, it might be helpful to also talk a little bit about your platform.
Yes, okay. So I am running as an independent. I know a lot of people believe that an independent is a wasted vote, but I challenge that notion because I looked at Baltimore for the past few decades, whether it was me moving up here or looking at different areas of the district that are ignored in Maryland 7, and nothing has changed. Like the vote hasn't improved the situation. So for me, running as an independent is because I really do believe that there are things on the right that make sense. There are things on the left that make sense. There are things in between that make sense. And I am a person who believes in getting to common ground, problem solving, and working together to get things done. I've worked with people across the nation, honestly, working in different states and things like that, doing government performance and doing work with data or helping folks stand up technology in their courts. And I've seen what it takes to work together. I can go in Texas and work with a Republican. I can go in Colorado and work with a Democrat. Like, it's not about the party, it's about what's best for the people. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running as an independent, is because I really do believe we have to have both to make this work. It's not gonna work if we don't work together. And your second question was going into my platform. Yep. So Maryland's 7th District is, has a lot of different types of people in it. A lot of times people only associate Maryland 7 with Baltimore City, and they often forget about Howard County and Baltimore County. So when I was looking at platforms and talking to people, it was very important to me that we talk about things that actually go across all the counties and the city. It's not just something that we're focusing on in one area. And the 3 things that are really important for me and my priorities, one is the future of families. What does that mean? It's ensuring that people have access to healthy lives and quality of life, and to ensure that folks are not being restricted from life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and property due to policies that the government may put into place. A lot of times, I've worked for the government, will put things into place or make rules or things and put them into place and not realize it actually can cause harm to certain groups of people. So we have to be very careful about that. The way we circumvent that is making sure we research things, we evaluate things to make sure they're actually working for people. You shouldn't just put policies into place and leave them there and not actually evaluate their outcome. Right. And that also includes, like, what are the job outcomes for people as it relates to families? Second is the future of work. The future of work is going to drastically change over the next 10 to 50 years. The jobs that were available in the past are not going to be available in the future. And we're changing, and the economy is changing, right? We're more globalized. We have more technology. We're in a situation where there's a gig economy, right? Think about the Ubers of the world who have changed how the taxi industry works. Think about how a lot of automation is coming and changing the way we actually deal with jobs, and the way that jobs are actually done, where some of those jobs will no longer need a human in place. Before I ran for office, I was working for a nonprofit, and we were looking at the legal system. And even in the legal system, computers are able to handle or scan a contract and give you an outcome quicker than an actual human, because a computer can scan 10,000 cases. A person can't do that in an efficient amount of time. So we need to understand jobs are changing. So we need to make sure there are policies in place that give people the skills, training, and education they need to make sure they're ready to compete in that. And then on the flip side of that is, yeah, technology brings opportunity, but technology also brings risk, right? So there's risk to bias in data, there's risk to privacy, there's risk to security, and all these different things. One of the top things that people should be concerned about, and most states are concerned about, is cybersecurity issues. We all have been a part of somebody's data hacking. That's only going to get worse as technology continues to grow and things like that. So how can we ensure that people are not being harmed by the technology that can also be a benefit and provide jobs? And then finally, it's the future of communities. Communities are more connected than ever. We're seeing that with COVID-19. For example, it started in a whole nother country on a whole nother continent, and it was able to get here within a few months. We need to understand that we're global. We're a globalized country, and we're tech driven. So there aren't these imaginary lines that exist. They exist in the sake of laws and things like that, but they don't stop technology problems. They don't stop pandemics. They don't stop those type of things. But because of that, we need to make sure we have the physical infrastructure as well as the technological infrastructure to handle things like that. In 2020, people should not have issues with access to broadband internet or access to digital tools. We're seeing that even now with what's happening with COVID, a lot of schools, kids were not prepared because they didn't have those things at home. Right. So this is only going to increase as the economy becomes more globalized and we introduce more technology, making sure that folks have what they need. And finally, with that piece, with connected community or future of connecting communities, is making sure we're working together at the local, state, and federal level. We can no longer just live in our silos. We used to do a really good job of working together. And I feel like now is the time to get back into that. And I believe that even with this pandemic, we're getting back to that. It's hard when you have multiple people with multiple policies and focuses, even within a state, locality, or at the federal level, to get those things accomplished if we're not working together. It's important for me, instead of worrying about what lobbyists want, is to be back at home with the mayor, be back at home working with the governors, be back at home working with those individuals who are actually in the communities we're living in and who care about the communities we're living in.
Yeah, I think you said a lot there. And I think that one of the things that I think about based on some of your comments is we have the infrastructure and the solutions typically exist to solve some of our biggest problems in our communities. But one of the things that is lacking is the will to implement those, the will to remove some of those barriers. You know, broadband internet access, I think is something that you mentioned in talking about making families healthier. And one of the things that you're hearing a lot about is the transition to telehealth. And you know, this is something that has existed for a while, but the will to move in that direction hasn't been there for some of the reasons you laid out, privacy issues and data concerns. But when you talk about the impacts, the positive impacts it can have to communities who've been underserved, it should be a priority. So, you know, I think that is something that in my pursuit of elected office, addressing some of those things are some of my priorities, and ensuring that the policies and practices that are in place don't continue to harm
Right.
generations of folks as they already have. And so you've laid out a lot of really important things and really interesting things. What would you describe to potential constituents
Hmm.
are your qualifications for pursuing this role?
Good question. So, for me, I did logistics management, and we can say that that doesn't prepare me. It does. Running $1 million logistics processes for a top 50, Fortune 50 company does prepare you for a lot. But I've also worked in government. And in government, I work specifically with data and performance improvement or implementing technology and ensuring that ethical concerns were taken into consideration, as well as the business process improvement that comes with that, as well as stakeholder building and stakeholder engagement. One of the most important things that I've learned is to work with both Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Green Party, it doesn't matter who you are, is when we are working on an issue that matters to people and that literally impacts the lives of individuals, we have to work together. We're not going to agree on both sides or agree on everything, but there are things that we can all agree on. I remember growing up, I learned something called the sweet spot. And the sweet spot basically means everyone has one thing that they can agree on together. And you have to start with your sweet spot. What is that one thing we all agree upon? And then we build out from there. Right now, we're working from the other way. It's like, what do we not agree upon? And then we're going to fight, and forget the things that we probably agree on 30% or more, right? But we forget about that. So I think I bring the qualification of being able to work together and find common ground and not having the partisan fighting or the need to do that, because I care more about people than I care about all of those things.
Right.
The second thing is my background with data and technology and being a generalist in that area in so many different ways. I know what's happening across the country as relates to data, specifically data and technology in government and what is happening with that and how that's changing government and how it's changing how people access work and the economy. And it burdens me that a lot of people within Washington are not thinking about those things. I do know now that we do have the Future of Work caucus that launched in January, which is super exciting. We have individuals who tried to push this before, like Mark Warner out of Virginia, who's put before Congress a few bills on multiple times saying, hey, we need to prepare for the future of work. But no one's listening, and it feels like they're starting to listen. So I already have that background and know, hey, this is something that should be top priority, because in the next 10 years, by 2030, a third of job skills could possibly not be existent and not be needed. Think about where we were 10 years ago. And in 10 more years, with technology continuing to ramp up and continue to only get faster, and quantum computing and all these things happening, we have to prepare Americans so that they're able to be flexible between jobs. And then finally, I think a qualification and a good reason is that I am a person who is independent and I don't have a stake in the game. I don't have a super PAC backing me. I don't have any of those things that would deter my interest, that would make me focus on a organization versus focusing on the people. And I think that's important when we think about how we do government in this country and how we do elections and how we operate as elected officials.
Yeah, I think that I think that you hit on a number of things there. And I think that, to that question about qualifications for the role, I think that this pandemic is exposing a lot of our gaps in our society and our elected leadership. I know when you decided to run, you couldn't have anticipated a global pandemic, and myself included. And I think that many of the things that you're talking about are, how do we look at job flexibility? How do we look at making bringing access to those life-enhancing options closer to people, more accessible for people, either
Right.
using technology or adapting them to the changing landscape. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that this experience that we're all going through right now with the pandemic is really plays well to your favor, because it shows just how we have to think more proactively. We can't keep
We
doing
do.
things the same way that we've always been doing. And so that brings me to my next question. And, it really is, what have you anticipated
Mm-hmm.
are going to be some problems that are going to arise as a result of this pandemic? And how will families adapt to a pandemic such as the coronavirus, or something else that causes the similar disruption in life? How
Mm-hmm.
will families adapt to that in the future? And what are some things that you can anticipate that we will need to address going forward?
That's a good question. And thank you. Let me say this. Thank you all for sending these questions in. When I looked at the questions, I was like, oh, wow, I could have a town hall on every single one of these questions that are about to come up. But these are very good questions, and I thank you all for asking these. So you said, what can I anticipate as it relates to the coronavirus? So one thing I will say is I think that we're seeing right now what we can anticipate. People are adaptable, and people, especially in the district that I'm serving, are out there getting things done and doing what they need to do. They're not waiting for an answer. They're not trying to figure out, oh, is the government going to operate a certain way? They're being ingenuity. They're using ingenuity. They're coming in and doing what they need to do for their families. People are looking at health differently, right? Every group I'm looking at, and every group chat and every phone call is about eating better, is about educating themselves on what they should be putting in their bodies to make sure their immune systems are healthy. It's about spending time with family. It's about ensuring that they're able to educate their kids and things like that. We're literally going back to the basics with this pandemic, and that's one of the benefits that's come out of it. But the harm that's come out of it is that we could have been prepared for this.
Right.
We have known from the beginning of time that pandemics and viruses often transfer from some animal into humans. And because of that, we should have had a plan put into place ready to go for this. Yes, there are different plans and doomsday scenarios that we have to create that are at a heightened level of like when things really hit the fan. But there's a way that people in Washington can have these plans ready to go. And we saw it with the bipartisanship that happened. They literally came together, threw something together as fast as possible, but then there was a lot of issues with it. But we could have done that beforehand. We could have prepared people beforehand. And I think what's the most important thing for the American people from a leadership's perspective is that we have leaders in place who are thinking about the future. We know cybersecurity is going to be an issue. We know national disasters are going to be an issue. We know all these things are happening and coming that are like level red. These things are going to hit and these things are going to happen. So we need to make sure that we're preparing for that. We can no longer say, oh, we didn't know this was going to happen, or I didn't expect that. We know the threats. Now, the threats that we don't know, we do need to have smart people in the room who are working in these fields who know what's going to happen, or at least have an idea what's going to happen. What are going to be the effects of artificial intelligence when that is implemented through our whole society, and what does that look like? Right. What are the effects of self-driving cars? What are the effects of these other things that are going to change how we operate in society? We can start looking at that now. We don't have to wait until we're at level red emergency or level 10 emergency. It's similar to what happened with Facebook. I think about that, where the people in Washington didn't even know how to ask questions about a tool like Facebook to be able to get the information they needed. That is a problem. We need to make sure people are in leadership who understand the future and look back at the past to learn from it, but keep their heads forward to ensure that they're focusing on the future and not being stuck in bipartisanship, or excuse me, in partisanship.
Right. And I am a registered Democrat. I'm running for city council in Baltimore City, 7th as a Democrat. But I think that it is important to break down those silos and step outside of this tribalism that we see happening, because I think that we can miss opportunities to serve our constituencies better. So let's take a step away from some of the hard policy positions and platform.
Thank you. And no, it's fine.
So me personally, I have been working from home and campaigning essentially from home for almost 8 weeks now. And I have 2 young children, and my wife and myself have been working from home and trying to find different ways to maintain some kind of routine and to stay healthy and to work out and to try not to eat all the snacks. What have you been doing to stay healthy during this time?
So I live with an autoimmune condition, so I've had to live healthy for the last few years after I got diagnosed. So I do make sure like I'm eating my vegetables, vitamins and all that, and I only go outside for essential reasons. I have my mask. I overly obsess over washing my hands even when I don't leave the house. So yeah, it's been just making sure I'm following the guidelines that are put into place and taking care of my health and mental health. Because I know a lot of people and those who are even like attending right now, this stuff is mentally draining a little bit when you feel like you don't know what's happening. So definitely take time to do what you need to do for yourself, pull away from the kids, and take time to make sure you're putting those things in your body that are only going to help you feel better.
Yeah, yeah. And I think another good question that came in from your registrants is what are you doing or what will you be doing to help families during the lockdown? And I'll just say here in
Mhm.
Baltimore City, there has been such an expression of need. There's been an expression
It's a
of
lot.
volunteerism and people working to give back. But you do start to see a bit of fatigue there. However, the need
Yeah.
is not going anywhere. There's
Hmm.
still a lot of people with need, whether it's food, technology, employment. And so, what are some of the things that that you have in mind that you can or are doing or will be doing to help families during this time?
Another good question. So before we started with COVID, the plan was, before we knew all this, was to spend Saturdays doing serve Saturdays, where we
Mhm.
go out in the community and serve together. I'm a big person on service. I volunteer, and I've always been active in that way because I think we have to give back. If we all gave back, imagine how great the world would be.
Right. Yeah.
But because of COVID, we've had to readjust some of that. So some of the things we were planning are, for example, like doing virtual fundraisers with organizations that may be running out of money for food drive or for their food banks or what have you. We're planning on doing some virtual like exercise classes for people to join in on, just so they can do something online. Most people have access to a smartphone, so you can watch that stuff online and do an exercise class with that.
Mhm.
Virtual finance classes and things like that. So we're trying to figure out ways to continue to do things virtually with also creating a plan where we're going to be trying to volunteer where we can in those places that you mentioned above, like folks who are doing food banks or passing out masks and things like that.
Thank you. That's helpful. Yeah, I think that the mask thing I think is interesting because now that we have this mandatory mask in public
Mhm.
spaces, you see some unfortunate circumstances that are occurring around the nation really for people who are trying to enter in places of businesses without masks and
Yeah.
interactions with the police. I think is an important concern. And a lot of times, those types of or those populations where people have high levels of need, whether that's they have food insecurity, housing insecurity. You know, a lot of those things are tied to lack of employment and other conditions that are really um, uh, uh, um, impacting their
Mhm.
ability to live a dignified or a healthy and quality life. So what are some of your ideas for the need for solid employment? I know you talked about training people and
Yep.
preparing people for the future of work. So what are some ideas around that, around addressing sustainable and stable employment and other living conditions that are impacting folks' living conditions? What are some of your thoughts on that?
So thank you once again for asking that. So the thing for me is that there's a gap already, and that gap is only going to increase, if not like it's going to exponentially increase with technology and the gap that comes with folks not having the skills and training in those areas. The jobs of the future are going to require people to be able to shift into different roles, right? We're no longer in a place where people are going to be in jobs for 30 to 50 years. That's just not going to happen. Folks are saying that's not the way we're going to operate anymore. We see that with the millennial population. We see that with Gen Zers and things like that. Folks are not going to be in jobs for a very long time. So that means that you're going to have to be able to carry things with you. Like, think how that impacts your 401k. Think how that impacts your healthcare. Think how that impacts your life insurance. So there's already these issues. So that's only going to be exacerbated for the group that you're specifically asking about. And I believe the question was asking specifically about people who are in poor neighborhoods and who don't have access to capital or income. So I think what is very important is to look back at some of the things that they're trying to get through Congress right now that no one's paying attention to. I think the last time they reintroduced 4 acts focused on the future of work back in February of 2019, and they're now in committee, and we know how that tends to go. And that's a concern because those acts, if we work together in a bipartisan way, talk about some of the things that I also think are very important. One is to have accounts that folks can use to set up where they can put money in and either get a match of some sort or some type of tax credit or some type of tax flexible account that allows them to put money into that to use it for training and things like that. There's tax incentives for businesses to train people on different skills. I don't know about you all who are listening. The last time I've been trained in a job was probably back in 2005 with my first job. Now jobs expect you to know the skills and expect you to jump in and be able to handle it. That's fine if you're
Mhm.
a mature worker and you've been in the workforce, but for folks who are coming in who are younger or who are trying to transition, no one's doing the training. So that giving incentives for individuals to train. There's also there's an act about piloting options for how do we actually take our benefits with us.
Mhm.
It's very hard when your benefits are tied to a job and not tied to you as an individual. So every time you move from a company, that's new life insurance, that's new health insurance, that's new 401k. So those things are very important. And a lot of those things in that act are specifically targeting low income and medium income people to ensure that they're able to get the training by giving tax incentives to businesses to do apprenticeships, to do those things and create programs and policies for those folks. And those things I definitely stand behind. I know apprenticeships are great and they work. Where my parents retired back in Virginia, they had a huge apprenticeship at the Norfolk Naval Shipyard. And that apprenticeship started folks out at a good quality wage. They learned a skill set that they could use during that time period. And then when they got done, they were able to work in that field and stay there. So we have to get back to some of that stuff we know how to do. Technology is bringing a lot of different things and a lot of new skill sets to the system. And I think in order to ensure that that gap doesn't get wider, we have to put in good policies in place and pass some laws that are going to incentivize people to get the training as well as business to provide training as well.
Yeah. We just talked quite a bit about, how the conditions of people living in poorer neighborhoods
Mm-hmm.
how pathways to employment and training can be created for them. We're experiencing the individuals who are their primary income earners losing their jobs left and right. We have
Yep.
historic rates of folks applying for unemployment, people losing their jobs and things such as that. There are, as you are aware, a number of options to aid and assist folks who are the primary income earners to get back in the
Yes.
workforce. Just a couple of them, they can move to where there are jobs. They can be retrained at quote unquote taxpayer expense or some other expense or subsidized approach. What approach would you consider for providing, again, a pathway to employment or to support a primary income earner, particularly
Mm-hmm.
one who is the head of a family?
That's a very hard question to answer right now because a lot of folks are dealing with that. I don't mean hard as in though I can't answer it, but it's just very hard emotionally to know that a lot of people are dealing with that
Yeah.
right now at levels that we were not expecting. No one walked into the highest stock market we've had in ever, right? Expecting to lose their jobs or be laid off. So for the person who asked that question, thank you for asking that. And I'm also very sympathetic to what is happening out there right now. The other thing I just want to point out, Brian, before I answer the question is I think the stat is close to 50% Americans can't deal with a $400 emergency.
Yeah.
So this isn't something that is happening to just a few of us. It's not just happening to part of the population. We have rising national debt as well as rising personal debt. So those are things that can impact and crush a family even more so when they lose their primary breadwinner. And because of that and because the way we're set up, I think it's even more important than ever to make sure that when you do have a job, things like healthcare aren't tied solely to your job. There has to be another way to do that. There
Right.
are options out there. I don't necessarily agree with all the options that people are putting out there, but there are ways to ensure and to test for how we can ensure that people can leave their job and take their benefits with them. There's plenty of ways that we can test that out now. We know by 2030 that the skills of today, or a third of them will be possibly obsolete. Then right now we should be piloting, options and evaluating options to see what works best. Do we need to expand unemployment? Do we need to ensure that there's something that allows you to carry benefits and you're paying into some other system versus paying into your company?
Right.
Do we need to look at these other things? There are ways that we folks in Washington, and hopefully me, can set up a system that allows us to do just that. We can go ahead and plan for that. We don't have to wait for things like this to happen. And we saw that again with what happened with the unemployment insurance being expanded due to COVID. But we don't have to respond to that in a way that's like reactionary, right? We can actually plan for that and make sure those things exist for people. And I think more than ever, with the change in job skills, more people are going to be in danger of what the individual asks, and that's people being laid off from jobs. And then the problem will be is finding a job that has the same skill set that you left. Imagine your parent being in a job for 30 something years, and then those skills are no longer needed. How do we shift that person into a job that is or skills that are marketable so they can get another job and then possibly have a second restart? My dad retired from the Army after 20 years. He struggled to find a job his first year, and that was back in the late 90s. So I can only imagine now, if that happened to him, how would he be able to adjust to what is going on in the current system? So we need to make sure that our laws are incentivizing businesses to train people, to do these different things, to incentivize people to either, whether it's a tax credit or some type of account that they can invest in, to do those things.
Yeah, I think for the folks who've been paying attention to me and some of the things that I say, we are witnessing a public health approach to a public health crisis right now.
Mm-hmm.
However, I have always said that, working as someone who works in public health and healthcare policy, that we can apply a public health approach to a lot of things. And, and the connection that I'm making here is that oftentimes a lot of these big issues that you're highlighting, what's good for the individuals and the most vulnerable individuals in society benefits everybody in society, because we are
seeing for the minimum, it impacts the maximum.
Exactly. We're all in this together, and it doesn't just apply to wearing masks to protect us from you and you from us in terms of transmitting a virus, but it when our communities are stabilized because people have living wage jobs and they have stable housing, crime goes down, education, when our education system is not failing our youth, that we see higher rates of folks who are employed, healthy. Health and education go hand in hand. Economics and health go hand in hand. And so I think that it's important that we tell that story, that what's good for the most vulnerable of us improves our entire society. And I think that's important to keep in mind.
That's one thing when I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. That's one thing when I'm working with folks in different states or what have you, when we're looking at how we're going to implement a technology right, is the plan for the minority, whatever the minority population is. So then once you plan for the minority, you'll hit the things the majority needs naturally, and making sure you're bringing in those people who are in that minority population to ensure that they have a voice. I think there's a problem when we put in policies without getting the voice of the people. And that's the voice of multiple people. That's just not picking and choosing who we think is going to be on our side. It's making sure that we're building policies that work for people, and not that we've thought of because of some white tower where we decided, oh, this is how we're going to do it, and this is how we want things to go. It's important to represent the people and hear from the people and ensure that you're taking that accurate representation back and putting that stuff into place, and not using your own initiatives or your own thoughts on what should happen and forgetting about folks who are living it every single day.
Yeah. And I think that, the conversation in my mind that, we're going to have at some point is whether or not many of these issues that you're talking about are a right or a privilege. And I think that is what really determines, some of the policies and practices that come out of this. Healthcare, I think we're realizing now that it should be a right. It should be a right because we are all in this together. And when the most vulnerable of us don't have access to that, it impacts everybody else. And so, we are seeing people that can't adequately social distance, or that can't adequately self-quarantine or self-isolate because they live in multi-generational housing, or they are essential workers and they're working on the front line, either at the grocery stores or the buses, or, in healthcare or what have you. And if they don't have adequate access to healthcare, then that impacts everyone, and everyone feels threatened. But again, like you said, it's important to be proactive and to anticipate, which is why we need smart leadership in all of our elected offices. One more question about the future families, and then there were some other questions a little bit separate that have been submitted. We talked a lot about employment. We talked about the conditions that some of our poor communities live in. What are your thoughts around pathways to affordable and or adequate housing? And particularly the question was asked, your thoughts about rent stabilization.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your thoughts about that, about housing, addressing the housing problem that many of our communities face?
Hmm. So that question is interesting in that I'm not sure what the person is asking, but I'm going to answer the way what
Uh-huh.
I think they were asking me, because I think the question was, what do you think about rent stabilized folks? Was the question. So I think, first of all, I think all of us here, I appreciate everyone. I don't look at people differently or anything like that. So let me just set that's there. But
Uh-huh.
for rent stabilization, from what I know is that that is normally put into place by a state, and the states give localities the opportunity to put in rent stabilization in areas that are like, normally it's like the property values are going up and things are going up and rent is going up, and they're trying to make sure they're not evicting people. And I think that that makes sense. States are allowed to. There's a few states, I'm not sure the complete number, but I know there are some states to allow their localities to put rent stabilization policies in place, and I'm not against that. I think that makes sense, especially depending on where you're living. If you're in California, most of us can't live there anymore, right? Most Californians can't live there. They're moving out, they're moving into Texas, they're moving into, if you look at a map at how many folks moved out of California, they're moving into the surrounding areas of like Nevada, and those places at ridiculous rates. So if you see this influx of folks coming into communities, we want to make sure we don't uproot the people who are currently there.
Hmm.
But with that being said, it is a business, right? Apartments or things like that, those are businesses. So at the end of the day, we have to also think about there's a landlord here and also a tenant. So both of those people, we need to make sure neither one loses out because of these policies. So I
Hmm.
think that's important in what you just asked about home ownership and owning homes. Like one of the things that I think is really important is that we don't put barriers up in place so that people cannot get access to home ownership if they are able to actually do that. Because there's a point where rent is more than than a mortgage, and a
Right.
lot of folks in certain communities don't even know that they can actually qualify for a mortgage that is not going to break the bank, that is not going to hurt them because they haven't been received those trainings and things like that, or haven't seen ownership. And then on the flip end, there's a lot of folks who may not want their family home. So you see those homes often get left, and we have a lot of issues with blight specifically in the city. And there's certain issues with that and understanding like the value of property and all those issues. Granted, Congress can't fix all those things, but those are things that we can work together on a local state level to figure out how do we put policies in place to incentivize that. And one more caveat is the fact that a lot of folks who came out of school with six-figure debt can't get homes. That's the reality right now. I think home ownership is going lower and lower, and we're almost at the rates of I think 2006 of people like buying homes again. And that was before we hit a Great Depression. That's a concern because there are all these other issues. Like I said earlier, 49% of the population can't afford a $400 emergency without going into debt or going to someone else to get help.
Right.
So there's these things in our society that are breaking in different areas. And I think a lot of things are going to break at once. And because of that, we need to make sure that we're thinking ahead and trying to figure out what those things are so we can put a little bit of cushion underneath. So when people do have issues, we're able to ensure that they're not falling, if they do fall, they're able to get right back up.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that those issues are not going to be solved overnight, but I
Not at
think
all.
it's important to one of the things that's really encouraging about your campaign and your background is the use of data and being able to
Hmm.
show one of the things you mentioned was about housing, being able to afford buying a house. It's
Right.
more affordable than some people think, but it's nowhere near as affordable as it was when our parents were buying their
No,
first.
not at all.
And I think that if you look at those trend lines and you look at the
Especially not if you get closer to DC.
right, well, and when you look at how wages have really been stagnant over the last 30 or 40 years, when you look
Hmm.
at again the inflation in
Yep.
college degrees, on top of the fact that by and large you have to have a 4 year, at a minimum, a 4 year bachelor's degree
Hmm.
to get into some of these entry level jobs that our parents
Right.
could get straight out of high school and
Right.
support an entire family. We have two uh, uh, parent households. Both parents are
Hmm.
working now, or in two-parent households, both parents are working, and so that is kind of the new norm. And I think that when people compare the way that past generations were able to do certain things, as in, why can't we do it? I think it's important to have someone with that grounding and that basis in numbers and the data that can show that. So we have about a little more than 15 minutes left, and so we
Okay.
have a number of questions. Mr. Daly, you have a couple of questions there. We are going to get to that. We have a couple more questions in front of that, and then we'll make sure we
And
get
Mr. Daly, your questions in the next round of questions. So if we miss, I didn't realize that I was going to get so many questions, and the questions are very hardy.
Mhm.
So if we miss questions today, they will be answered in our next town hall, or I'll make sure I'll answer it to you directly. We're not going to leave you hanging at 7 o'clock,
Yep.
but we'll make sure to answer those for you.
Sure. So we are in the next round of questions, it looks like. And so, this question, so these questions are going to be interesting. Thank you for answering some of these. So the self-proclaimed Democratic Socialist, Bernie Sanders, has dropped out of the presidential race. I think that was to the dismay of many. However, there are a lot of conversations about, what is socialism and what does socialism mean? So what are your thoughts, your opinions about socialism and the socialist advocates, in the Democratic Party?
Boy, oh boy. Thank you for whoever asked that question. I say that laughingly. No, but so for me, I grew up in let me be very honest. I grew up in a conservative household. My parents were in the military, they're in the Army, and normally that equals you're going to be conservative to at least some level of degree. And for me, where I saw socialism was in the church. I didn't see it as much in like government or think about it in the government standpoint. Like I grew up knowing you pay your tithes, that money gets dispersed to help people, and everyone bring that into the church so we can all work together and do what we need for the people. I think for me, I don't necessarily believe in socialism from a government standpoint. I do believe that there are entities who have been empowered by the government, specifically nonprofits, churches, and things like that, who have these tax-free statuses that can use the money they have to impact and improve the community. And I believe in working heavily with those groups to ensure that we are helping folks and continuing to work with folks. I don't think that the government should overreach into that area for me personally. And I don't think that's how we've been operating for some time. So I don't see us moving there anytime soon. I do understand why people are moving towards that as it relates to wanting to help people out and ensure we lift everyone up. But I think there are other ways to do that. And I think that our current system, if people are good people, right, we can accomplish some of the same things.
Yeah, and I think, my personal opinion, that's going to be a while before we get there. I think that's one of the challenges we have, because I think we all would prefer a society or a society where people do the right things because it's the right thing to do. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. And so I think that there is a balance between, what we are mandated to do versus what, people are afforded in society. And so another tough question is, your opinion about capitalism and crony capitalism. I think, crony capitalism, I'm pretty sure, depending on who you ask, they might define that, a number of different ways. But I think just by the nature of that preface, crony, I think that we can all agree that is bad. But I guess it depends on how it's defined. And so what are your thoughts about capitalism and quote unquote crony capitalism?
All right, I'm gonna start from the second one first, crony capitalism. And from the definition, I understand that to mean is capitalism that people benefit from relationships of whether it's political and business relationships together, whether it's friends or things like that. You benefit not because of being innovative and competing like capitalism normally operates, but you're benefiting due to some relationship. I don't think that that's the right way to go, ever. I don't think that things should be based solely on your success. If you're in capitalism, should be based solely on your relationships or your ability to lobby and get your interests heard and to spend a ridiculous amount of money through super PACs or things like that to encourage elections or encourage things to get what you want. I don't think that's right. I do believe in capitalism. I believe in capitalism that allows people to use their creativity, to use their insight and things like that, and to create new markets. Like we live in a world where we're interacting with so many different things because someone was allowed to be creative. I think that's important for folks to be able to build businesses and do amazing and creative things.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen what's happening with COVID-19, right? People have had to be creative about how they change their business model and how they think about providing services to people. Like I've seen so many different people popping up as entrepreneurs. I've had friends who have now stepped out and start doing some amazing things because they realize that they have to have a competitive edge and they have to do things a little bit differently to compete in this society. Now, do I think capitalism should hurt people or cause harm at the end of the day? Do I think capitalism should be in healthcare? No, I don't. I'm a person who has a health condition, who's dealt with the healthcare system and who has and had healthcare and knew the healthcare system because my mom is a nurse and understood it. And I still had problems with healthcare, with being educated about the healthcare system, accessing quality healthcare for myself.
Right.
So those are things that we have to make sure that we look at the wins and the benefits and the opportunities for both.
So let's stay in on that for just a minute. What are, I guess you kind of answered it. The areas where there are markets are ripe for capitalism. And, when you talk about healthcare and you talk about what we talked about earlier, that, a healthy population benefits us all. I think that it's important that, we all are beneficiaries in one way or another of capitalism. And, like you said, there have been times where people are hurt by that. So I think it's important to make that distinction that you made. Here's one. I think this is interesting. And as obviously an independent candidate, you're going to get some of these questions because, again, we are so tribal, as we said in the beginning, and it's like when you consider yourself a member of a team, people just assume that you straight down the line are with that team. And that's a problem for me. It's a problem that we've seen really manifests itself in this country. So what is your position on the Second Amendment of the Bill of Rights? And so for those who don't know, the Second Amendment is the right to bear arms. What are your thoughts on the Second Amendment?
So I'm going to agree with what you said earlier. It's interesting for me, like I'm going to answer that question. Oh, I just want to say something real quick. It's interesting to me because we've had a Congress that was all Republican at one point, at least in my lifetime, and all Democrat at one point. And no one touches these issues. Like they kind of leave these issues alone. Like even when they can change it, they know if they go back home, they're not gonna get elected. So they're never gonna mess with firearms. So to say that, sorry, I just had to get that off my chest. But my position on firearms is that I grew up with my grandfather hunting and he killed deer and I ate venison and things like that. So I think it is important in a way of life for a lot of people as it relates to even like safety, right? My mother she owns a firearm. I don't own one, but she owns one. My brother was an MP in the military at one point, so he had a firearm. I've shot a firearm because I was in ROTC, at one point. So there are certain things where I think that people can use guns and grow up around those things and they understand what those look like. Or how to use that in a way that's not harmful to people. But where I do agree with most Americans, and this is on both sides, most people agree we do need common sense background checks.
Yeah.
Like we need that. That's not something that's stopping someone from owning a gun. If you know someone is dealing with mental illness or things like that, and that can be, or has other issues in their past, right? Domestic violence and things like that. We just want to make sure people aren't being harmed to get a right? Rights are in place because they're rights for us. When our rights start hurting others, then we need to look at something else, right? So I think it makes sense to have background checks for firearms.
I think one of the things that a lot of very staunch advocates for the Second Amendment say is that as you infringe on law-abiding citizens' rights to bear arms, people who are willing to break the law will continue to do that. What do you say to folks who related to your response about common sense gun laws? So again, that's 30% of the country that is opposed to that. Roughly 70% of
the majority is okay with it.
Is okay with it.
Yeah.
What do you say to the minority that say, or how would you address some of the illegal means of obtaining firearms or how would you engage in that conversation?
So that one is hard because a lot of people who are getting those guns aren't going through that system, right?
Right, right.
So that's something that is very important to work with. Again, that whole future of communities working together, is important to work with your local communities within the district, right? Working with the mayor, working with Baltimore City Police, working with Baltimore County, working with Howard County, working with these different areas to figure out what the issues are and helping to work on that and to see what they need from a federal level. Some of these things it's going to be hard unless it's like trafficking and things like that. You have to just look at what level of work it normally comes from, right? Or what person normally guides that type of policy. But at the end of the day, I think we all have to continue to work together. Specifically in Baltimore City, we know what's happening here. Even with COVID-19 going on, it's still killings. It's still gunshots. My next door is there's always something on next door. On occasion, I'll hear a gunshot. That's reality. And that's not something that makes people feel safe. But we have to work together to figure out how do we change the way those things are happening, specifically as it relates to guns that probably most likely were not gotten through the systems we were talking about earlier.
Sure. Thank you. So the topic of tonight is the future of families. And here in 2020, there is no one definition in society anyway of family, what family is. It means family looks like a lot of different things. There are various different combinations of families. When I first moved back to Baltimore after college, or moved to Baltimore after college, and shortly after buying my house here in Baltimore City, I lived with my sister and her family for a couple of years while my house is getting done. And so families take many different shapes and forms.
Mm-hmm.
And so particularly, what are your thoughts and your feelings about LGBT rights?
The hard part for me with this is the fact that we're having a question about someone's rights because of their sexual orientation is concerning to me as a population, right?
Right.
We all should be guaranteed the right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and property. Nothing should keep you from accessing life in America as Americans, right? That's the whole point of the living here, is that we have a constitution that gives us rights, and it shouldn't carve out specific populations of people that don't get the rights. Like, because then we continue to change who that population of people is that no longer have rights because of what label or what we decide to say that person shouldn't have rights because of X.
Right.
That's not how government should work. Government should work for all people, not a portion of people, because of what we may or may not agree with as far as different lifestyles. Like, government is meant to work for people, period.
Right.
Doesn't matter if you're LGBTQ, it doesn't matter if you are Black, white, yellow, it doesn't matter. It should work for all people.
Right. Yeah, and I think that is one of the things that when you look at the confidence that folks have in government, it is extremely low. I think it was like recently like 30%, and I think some administrations see a lower number there than others. But I think that when folks, whether they are LGBTQ or otherwise, feel that the government is not working for them, and it instead actually oftentimes is working against them, and a lot of other marginalized communities, they feel that way, and they have that distrust in government. So it's refreshing to hear you say that the government should work equally for everyone, and I think that that is something that we can all.
That's the role of government. If we want to argue, like, I'm not getting into details of what people's personal lives or personal opinions and things like that, but if you are working in the government and you're working for the people and working for your constituents, you're supposed to be there for those people. Like,
and I think, right, and I think
the whole, like, that's what you're signing up for. You're not signing up for anything else but to work for your people.
Right, and I think that's what we pay taxes for and all of that, and I think that
exactly. Are they now? Right. People getting taxes.
We all pay taxes. Right. And so we got a couple of more minutes. So we have two more. So we'll get to the last two questions. One of them is, what is your position on term limits? The number of terms that an elected official can serve in office. What are your thoughts about that?
We need term limits. The end. And I'm going to say something. I'm not saying it in a way to be rude or disrespectful, but our last congressman was in office for decades. And that's concerning because when the role of representative was created, they actually reduced it down to 2 years to make sure it was responsive to the people within the district that the person was representing. Because they understand things change that rapidly. Even when they put that into place, they knew things were going to change rapidly. So that's important. But there are things like gerrymandering, there are things that are attached to the amount of money that goes into politics and all that. Specifically, Maryland 7, if anyone doesn't look at that map and wonder how it was drawn, I question a few things. That map is drawn in the weirdest way, and I've seen even worse maps in other places in the country, and there's different legislation and law, not legislation, different court cases that have been going up for that. So what I will say is, yes, we need term limits. I think you have term limits on your president. I think you have term limits on your Congress people. And the other problem with Congress people is that after 2 years, they can go work for a lobbying. I think it's after 2 years, you can go work to be a lobbyist and make 7 figures. So it's actually incentivizing you to not do what's right for the people. So I think that term limits will help people not to get in and do work. And the other problem for folks who want to do work, immediately when you get in, you start fundraising again for the next election because you're trying to stay in there. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be where you can go in, get crap done, and make sure that you're working for the people.
Right. Absolutely. And finally, and we have 2 minutes, and so we're going to quickly, I'm going to quickly ask you this question. This is a really important question because as many of you know, we are in Maryland. We are, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we are in a vote by mail only primary.
Yes.
They have a couple of locations that will be open for people to drop off their ballot or vote in person for those who can't participate in the vote by mail option. And so this poses a whole new set of challenges. But the question is, what steps are being taken to ensure the integrity of our elections that you are aware of? And if you aren't aware of any right now that are being taken, what are some things that you might propose?
So I'm concerned a few things. I am concerned about, I'm gonna go very quick because we have like 1 minute. So as an independent, we have different rules. So I have to petition, which is fine, and I have to get my petition submitted by August. So that's another reason why I started a little bit later than everyone else. But in that, right, most of the candidates, normally when they know who the person they're selecting, they can put a lot of money behind those people. And it's just very interesting how if you want to run as a third party candidate, whether it's independent, liberal, libertarian, or any of those other things, you have to go through a whole bunch of other stuff. Companies won't even work with you if you're not affiliated with a party. So it's so interesting to see like how many things are just built for those parties. But as far as like elections and making sure elections are fair, what's happening with the special election is very interesting, or what happened was very interesting, how everyone got ballots at their home, but only 25% of voters voted. Right. And I question like what happened? Was that people didn't vote, or people voted and something else happened? So I think we have to be very smart about how we do elections and how we ensure that people's vote count. One vote, one voice, right? Allowing that person to get their voice out there. And I'm gonna cut it short because I know we're at 7.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that. Amber, where can people find more information on you and your campaign?
For sure, you can go to ivey2020.com. That's IVEY2020.com. Thank you all for joining tonight. I really appreciate it. You all said, sorry we had to rattle through those questions. I didn't even know we were gonna make it through all of them. But thank you so much for submitting those questions. Those are very good questions. And if you want more details, because some of them I had to speed through because of time, I'm willing to definitely chat with you. But you can contact me at ivey2020.com. You can email us at info@ivey2020.com. And thank you, Brian, for doing this. Sorry, my head has been flipping. I was looking at Brian, then trying to not look like I was looking at him. So thank you for doing this. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, and good luck out there.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
All right, see you.
Bye.